Many of us are used to believing that history is an exact and unbiased science, recording the past exactly as it happened. We are taught to trust the dates, names, and descriptions captured on the pages of school and university textbooks. However, when you dig deeper, it becomes obvious that this is far from the truth. History was indeed conceived as a science designed to preserve the memory of generations, but over time, it inevitably transformed into a subsidiary political discipline. There is an old and wise saying, "History is written by the victors." This means that chronicles are created by those who currently hold power. As soon as a political regime or a nation's vector of development changes, the chronicles are rewritten, fitting the past to the needs of the present. This is the essence of the problem. Endless editing turns real events into a convenient myth. To see the world as it was before massive informational edits, we need to look at sources that miraculously escaped 20th century censorship. One such artifact is the American Encyclopedia, published in 1852. This book is a real time capsule. Its value lies not in its beautiful binding or the age of the paper, but in the fact that it preserved the version of reality that was officially voiced in the middle of the 19th century. The text of this encyclopedia was not subjected to the ideological purges that occurred later, and therefore contains information that today might seem fantastic or impossible. When researching such old editions, one does not always find direct answers to global questions, like the causes of worldwide catastrophes or the location of vanished civilizations. However, the truth lies in the details. Careful reading allows us to discover facts that categorically do not fit into the modern historical paradigm. These inconsistencies destroy the orderly picture of the world we were taught from childhood. Original texts of that time show a completely different political geography, different state borders, and even different biological capabilities of humans. This encyclopedia, numbering thousands of pages, fell into the hands of researchers straight from America. And now we have the opportunity to translate and analyze its contents. This is painstaking work, the goal of which is not just to read an old text, but to compare it with what is written in modern books, and to find those very points of divergence where truth was replaced by fiction. We will systematically analyze it page by page to restore the lost picture of the past. Before we open this book and look into that reality which was hidden from the eyes of the general public, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. Your support helps promote this research and allows us to dig for the truth that has been hidden from us for decades. The first thing that catches the eye when studying this tome concerns a territory whose fate is debated to this day. We are talking about Alaska. Many think they know the history of these northern lands, as the official version sounds smooth and convincing. But what was discovered on page 200 of the encyclopedia from 1852 completely destroys the familiar myth about the sale of this vast territory and forces us to take a fresh look at the relationships between the empires of that time. It is generally accepted that the fate of Russian possessions in North America was decided by the geopolitical difficulties of the mid-19th century. Official historical science offers us a streamlined and, at first glance, logical version of events that we are used to hearing since our school days. According to this interpretation, the initiative to get rid of the overseas territories came from the Governor-General of Eastern Siberia, Count Nikolai Muravyov-Amursky. It is claimed that it was he who, in 1853, against the backdrop of the flaring Crimean War and worsening relations with European powers, first raised the question of the need to cede these lands. The arguments presented in textbooks sound convincing to those who are not used to asking too many questions. We are told that the empire was in a vulnerable position, that the defense of such distant frontiers was impossible and required colossal resources that the state did not have. The sale of the territory was presented as an inevitable step, capable of strengthening friendly relations with the United States, and allowing Russia to focus on strengthening its positions on the Asian coast of the Pacific Ocean. The result of this chain of events, as is known, was the deal concluded in 1867, when a huge mass of land officially changed owners. However, if we cast aside political rhetoric and look at the economic component, many uncomfortable questions arise. Alaska is not just an icy desert, as they sometimes tried to present it to justify the alienation. It is a region with colossal natural potential. These lands were rich in gold, which the industrialists of that time knew perfectly well, and furs, which were valued by the weight of precious metals. The development of these riches was not handled directly by the state bureaucratic machine, but by the Russian-American Company, a powerful commercial structure that effectively ruled the region. This company had its own symbolism, its own laws, and its own fleet. They used a special flag, which, although it resembled the familiar Russian tricolor, had significant differences. If the modern state flag, dating back to the sketches of Peter the Great, consists of stripes of equal width, then the banner of the Russian-American Company had a much wider white stripe. Under this banner, active trade was conducted, settlements were created, and resources were extracted, bringing fabulous profits. The company flourished, enriching itself on the bottomless treasures of the North. And suddenly, exactly at the moment when the political conjuncture demanded change, in 1853, the rhetoric changed sharply. Specially trained people began to claim that Alaska had become unprofitable. A profitable enterprise controlling gold mines and the fur trade was suddenly declared a burden on the treasury. An opinion appeared and began to be actively planted that these lands needed to be sold. This looks like a classic substitution of concepts, where economic reality is distorted to please hidden political agreements. After all, no one in their right mind would get rid of a printing press that generates income, unless there are other reasons not voiced publicly. Now let's turn to a source that was printed before this official version finally solidified in people's minds. We are holding a book published in 1852. There is not a single word in it about an upcoming sale, which they would allegedly start talking about just a year later. It contains no panic about losses or the impossibility of holding the territories. We are told that the lands were sold in 1867, but this encyclopedia describes the situation in the present tense completely differently. There, on the yellowed pages, a fact is recorded that all modern historians are silent about. There is something written there that completely overturns the idea of who actually owned this land and who received income from it. It is just one word, but it changes absolutely everything. Opening the 1852 encyclopedia to the corresponding page, we find a detailed description of Russian possessions in North America. The text dryly but accurately records the scale of this territory, indicating that it covers an area of 394,000 square miles. The population of these lands at that time was estimated at 50 to 60,000 people. The description of the landscape confirms that Russia's possessions on the continent are mountainous, and along the coast lie numerous extensive islands, which are also included in the imperial jurisdiction. It would seem like a standard geographical reference, but what follows is information that completely crosses out all our knowledge about the sovereignty of the Russian Empire over these lands in the 19th century. It says in black and white that the Russian-American Company previously possessed all these territories and established its posts there. However, the key word here is previously. The encyclopedia reports that in 1824, a treaty was concluded between Russia and the United States determining the borders. And it is from this moment that the most interesting part begins, about which modern history textbooks are silent. Since then, the source claims, the British received the entire continental part of these territories under a lease. The Russians actually occupied and controlled only the islands off the coast. This is a fundamental difference. Owning land on paper and leasing it long-term to a foreign power are completely different things. It turns out that already in the first quarter of the 19th century, long before the official sale, a huge part of Alaska actually passed under the control of the British Crown through commercial structures. The lease agreement was concluded for a period of 20 years. This means that from 1824, the Tsarist government, in essence, did not receive direct income from the riches of continental Alaska. All profits from the extraction of furs and minerals on the mainland went into the pockets of the tenants, while Russia was left with only crumbs from the island territories. This explains why subsequently these lands could be called unprofitable. After all, others were skimming the cream. But the story with the lease does not end there. The encyclopedia contains an article about New Britain, or the territory of the Hudson's Bay Company. It says that this company now owns the entire strip of the country extending from Baffin Bay to the Davis Strait in the east and to the Russian possessions in the west. Moreover, they extended their control by leasing for a new term of 20 years starting from 1840 all of Russian America. The only exception that remained under the full control of Russia was the post of Sitka. Thus, in two different articles of an authoritative American publication of the mid-century, a simple but shocking fact is recorded. Russian America was leased first in the 20s and then in the 40s of the 19th century. This information completely changes the context of the events of 1867. If the lands had been leased to the British, the Hudson's Bay Company, for decades, then the so-called sale could have been merely a legal formalization of an already existing situation, or a transfer of rights from one tenant to another. History textbooks are silent about this period. They tell us about heroic exploration and a sudden sale, but keep quiet about 40 years of British management on Russian land. This makes one think about the scale of distortions that our history has undergone. It turns out we were misled regarding the ownership of an entire continent and the financial flows of the empire. But if historians are capable of juggling geographical maps and political treaties so skillfully, hiding the truth about entire regions, then where is the guarantee that they are telling the truth in other matters? For example, when it comes to man himself, his biological nature, and life expectancy. Maybe the myth of the short and hard life of our ancestors is just as much a fiction as the official history of Alaska? After all, in the very same book, there is data that forces us to question the achievements of modern medicine. Modern science and the education system have successfully implanted in the mass consciousness a stable construct, according to which humanity moves exclusively along the path of progress, especially in matters of medicine and quality of life. We are persistently instilled with the idea that people of the 19th century were deeply unhappy, sickly, and extremely short-lived creatures. Statistical handbooks dryly report that the average life expectancy in those days barely reached 49 years. According to this logic, a 40-year-old person was considered a deep old man, standing on the threshold of eternity, and only a few, with phenomenal luck, lived to be 60. We are told that only thanks to the development of pharmacology, surgery, and hygiene have we received the opportunity to step over this threshold and enjoy so-called longevity. However, the yellowed pages of the Encyclopedia Americana of 1852 paint a completely different picture, one that leaves no stone unturned in the theory of the total morbidity of our ancestors. If we turn to the description, for example, of the state of New Hampshire, we find information that today seems like science fiction or a typesetter's error. The author of the article characterizes the climate of this area as exceptionally healthy, and the weather as generally serene. But the most striking thing lies in the description of the population. The text explicitly states that the longevity of the inhabitants is a well-known fact for this state. It is written there in black and white. It is not uncommon to meet people enjoying good health at the age of 100 years and upwards. Pay attention to the wording. Not just living out their days, bedridden, or existing on the verge of infirmity, but specifically enjoying good health. This is a fundamental difference. Today's medicine has indeed learned to prolong the physical existence of the body. But do we often see centenarians who are full of strength, clear of mind, and physically active? In the modern world, old age is associated with an endless list of diagnoses, handfuls of pills, and constant visits to doctors. We are used to thinking that 80 years is the limit beyond which inevitable fading begins. But for the inhabitants of the mid-19th century, if we believe the source, the 100-year mark was a completely achievable reality, and an active and full reality at that. This fact makes us wonder what exactly we lost on the path to so-called progress. Perhaps the environment of that time, the quality of water, air, and food, were so much higher than modern standards that the human body naturally realized its biological potential without any chemicals. It turns out that official statistics are disingenuous, mixing the high infant mortality of those years with the real life expectancy of an adult. Concepts are being substituted for us, hiding the fact that the biological resource of the past human was significantly higher than ours. We have become dependent on medicine, while our ancestors possessed a natural power that allowed them to maintain clarity of mind and strength of body for more than a century. The health of people of the past causes not only envy, but also serious suspicions about the truthfulness of the modern picture of the world. If we were deceived in matters of our own physiology, convinced of our weakness, then the scale of distortions could be truly global. Political maps have been redrawn, biological facts substituted, but there are things that cause a real stupor with their materiality. I found in this same book a description of one of the main landmarks of St. Petersburg, and these lines force one to doubt. Are we in that reality at all? Or has the very matter of stone been changed by someone's unknown hand? If the data on the health of people of the past evokes in us a sense of a lost golden age, and the political maps of the mid-19th century force us to doubt the honesty of school textbooks, then the description of physical objects of that era is capable of shaking our faith in the material stability of our world altogether. Flipping through the pages of the encyclopedia dedicated to the Russian Empire, at first, one encounters a rather dry and predictable list of facts. The authors pedantically list the administrative division, the number of provinces, the class composition, and the volume of exports of hemp and timber. In general, this section seems boring and not foreshadowing any sensations, until the gaze stops at one specific paragraph describing the main architectural dominant of the northern capital. We are talking about the famous monument to Peter I in St. Petersburg, which we are used to calling the Bronze Horseman. Anyone who has ever seen this monument, live or in numerous photographs, knows that the majestic equestrian statue towers over a huge, wild shard of rock. This pedestal, known as the Thunderstone, according to official history, is a giant block of granite, which was delivered from the outskirts of the city with incredible effort. Granite is a hard, granular rock, and in the case of the St. Petersburg monument, it has a characteristic grayish, wild shade, sometimes transitioning into pinkish, but by no means radically black. However, the American Encyclopedia of 1852 describes this object completely differently. In a text that claims documentary accuracy, it is written in black and white. The equestrian statue of Peter the Great is placed on a pedestal of solid black marble. This statement causes real cognitive dissonance. The author of the article did not just make a mistake in the name of the rock, confusing granite with marble, which in itself is strange for a scientific publication, but also confidently indicated the color, black. The difference between granite and marble is colossal. They are materials of different origin and properties. Granite is an igneous rock, a symbol of indestructibility and brute force, while marble is a metamorphic rock, softer, noble, often used for fine sculptures and palace cladding. Confusing a gray granite rock with a block of black marble is like confusing a log cabin with a brick house. At the same time, the encyclopedia indicates the weight of the pedestal, 1,500 tons. This figure surprisingly coincides with historical data on the weight of the Thunderstone before its final processing or at the time of transportation. That is, the American compilers possessed information about the scale and mass of the object, but at the same time gave a fundamentally different description of its material and color. This gives rise to a whole series of uncomfortable questions. Did the monument look different in the middle of the 19th century? Is it possible that under the influence of the atmosphere, time, or certain technogenic processes, black marble turned into gray granite? Or is this evidence that the history of the monument's creation, including the heroic epic with the movement of the Thunderstone, was invented later to explain the presence of the granite giant, while initially there stood something else? We are used to thinking that stone is the most reliable chronicle that cannot be faked. But if even the description of the central monument of the empire in an authoritative source contradicts what we see today with our own eyes, then where is the line between reality and historical reconstruction? Is a black marble pedestal weighing 1,500 tons a phantom that has disappeared from our reality? Or is it evidence indicating that the city on the Neva has a completely different history of construction? This mysterious black marble is just the tip of the iceberg of inconsistencies that old books keep. Every such detail, be it the color of stone, the borders of states, or life expectancy, shakes the foundation of the official version of the past. We are faced with a fact. The world described by eyewitnesses just a century and a half ago is radically different from the past we are told about today. And this difference requires reflection. Because if we don't know what the monument to the founder of the city actually stands on, do we know anything reliably at all? This black marble we spoke of is indeed just the tip of the iceberg of inconsistencies kept within old, unedited books. Having traveled this path from the first to the last page of our investigation today, we have seen a completely different picture of the world that existed just a century and a half ago. We started with geopolitics and discovered that the familiar history of Alaska is not just a story about selling land, but a complex scheme with a long-term lease where the real beneficiaries were the British Crown and trading corporations, and the Russian Empire, perhaps, only formally listed itself as the owner of continental territories. These facts, recorded in the Encyclopedia of 1852, turn the official version of the events of 1867 from a simple transaction into a tangled political detective story. Then we touched on a topic that is closer to each of us, the topic of human health and longevity. We uncovered the amazing truth that the biological potential of our ancestors was significantly higher than modern statistical reports try to suggest. Information that 100 years of age was the norm, not the exception, and that people maintained clarity of mind and high spirits until old age without modern pharmacology forces us to reconsider our attitude towards progress. We saw that the development of civilization may not be following the path of improving human nature, but the path of compensating for lost health with technology. And finally, the riddle of the St. Petersburg Monument showed us that even stone, seemingly the most reliable witness, can change its properties in official descriptions, turning from black marble into gray granite, as if someone rewrote the very matter of reality. All these findings lead us to one inevitable conclusion. Old books are the main evidence in the case against rewritten history. They serve as silent witnesses to how politics changes the past to please the present. Every time power or ideology changes, textbooks are rewritten, inconvenient facts are erased, and necessary accents are placed anew. But originals remember everything. They preserve the version of events that was relevant to contemporaries, and this version often turns out to be much more logical and interesting than the dry and contradictory paragraphs of the school curriculum. That is why it is so important to turn to primary sources, to those editions that were published before the era of global information wars and the total editing of the 20th century. However, our journey into the 19th century does not end here. It only begins. What we analyze today is only a small part of a huge array of information. I have the full version of this encyclopedia in my hands, and it contains more than 1,000 pages of fine text, each of which may hide another sensation. I plan to translate and analyze this entire volume to compile a complete picture of the world of that time. This is a huge job, but it is necessary to restore the truth. I will post the original scans of the pages so that each of you can personally verify the accuracy of the translation and touch history independently without intermediaries. We will look for answers to questions about buried cities, about the real borders of empires, and about technologies that were lost. History is much more interesting, multifaceted, and mysterious than what we are told in school or on TV. If you want to discover these secrets with me, analyze documents, and get access to unique, original scans that cannot be found in a modern library, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell so as not to miss future episodes, because ahead of us await hundreds of pages of the unexplored past. Like this material to help spread the truth, and write in the comments which of the facts amazed you the most. See you in the next chapter of our real history.